Hey everybody, Insane Mike here, the host of Attack of the Killer podcast. Time to do some new videos. There's a lot of different videos I want to do for you Patreon donators. I got a lot of ideas, but what I think I'm going to do right now is probably the dumbest thing I've ever thought of ever, and I'm going to do a series of videos based on what I think are the 100 greatest movies ever. Okay? So it's completely subjective. It's literally just my 100 favorite movies of all time. And honestly, it's probably not even going to be 100% accurate because, tastes change and, and then, discovering new movies and whatnot. And maybe even I might have forgotten some that would take the place of others. Because as I was doing this list, and I actually have the 100 right here, doing this list, I was kind of shocked that some filmmakers that I really like had more films in this list than other filmmakers that I thought would still be above. You could see a lot of my inspirations here, but also at the same time shocked that there's maybe some filmmakers that I love and admire that a movie of theirs didn't even show up, which really is weird for me. So there's a lot of self-discovery in doing this list here. But regardless, no particular order. I'm just going to randomly talk about movies within this pile, and it's going to be split up. So this one video is not going to cover all 100. Okay, and these are movies that I can watch and have watched over and over and over again. Movies that struck a chord with me. Movies that have inspired me. Movies that have influenced my own art. So it's a lot of that. So like I said, no particular order except for the number one spot. My all-time favorite movie, and if you've been listening to Attack of the Killer podcast for a while now, you know my all-time favorite movie is Dawn of the Dead. George Romero's Dawn of the Dead. And you can tell I'm a fan of Dawn of the Dead because I have it on VHS, but I've got a couple copies of it on VHS. I have several copies of it on DVD. My favorite version of any format is the Ultimate Edition DVD set that I have. I love this because and I wish more movies did this. It includes different edits of the film. There's the U.S. theatrical edits. There's the extended version, and even the European version, which I love because there's scenes that are so different in the European version than in the American version, and it's awesome because like Dario Argento and his production company produced Dawn of the Dead, so there's a lot of Italian influence within Dawn of the Dead, but no much more so than the European cut. Because I don't know if Argento himself did this cut, but it definitely feels more Italian when you watch that version. And then there's even another disc that's got like documentaries and a lot of cool stuff like that. So this is like my favorite version. I prefer this version over my Blu-ray of Dawn of the Dead. So I own 6 versions of Dawn of the Dead here, different formats, and I know I've had more. I know I've had at least 4 versions of it on VHS back in the VHS days. That I've like slimmed out a lot of my VHS collection down to bare bones, and out of all of those I only kept a couple. There's the HBO video release of it, and then this double one, which I can't even remember what the other tape of this is. Trailers. Okay. Anyway, and this was put out by Anchor Bay in the early days of Anchor Bay when they were still associated with Video Treasures. So So anyway, but yeah, so Dawn of the Dead, my all-time favorite movie. From the moment I first watched it to today, it still is a movie that always stands out. George Romero being my all-time favorite filmmaker, and you're going to definitely discover that through these videos. Dawn of the Dead being my favorite of his films and my favorite movie of all time. Mostly, I think that was like at the peak of Romero, with his editing style, his shooting style, his storytelling. And one of the things that I've always loved about George is his use of telling a story without a lot of dialogue, or if any. Like, there's some scenes in Dawn of the Dead that just play without dialogue. Another great example, which shows up in here somewhere, is Martin. There's a lot of beautiful scenes in Martin that tell such an amazing story within that scene without any use of dialogue whatsoever. So I really like that. I really admire that, and that's always something I've tried to incorporate in my own filmmaking, because it's always better to show than tell. But a lot of that technique that he had back in those early films was his use of editing. He didn't use like a lot of dolly shots or crane shots, stuff like that. He couldn't afford them. So he would just always do a lot of pickups of the elements within that scene that he felt he needed to tell the story of that scene. So Dawn of the Dead was the movie that made me want to be a filmmaker, because Dawn of the Dead was the movie that taught me that movies are an art form. So enough talking about Dawn of the Dead. It's number one. Will always be number one. But I need to move on. We got a shit ton of movies to talk about here. So I think the next one, another one of my all-time favorite movies. This is probably, honestly, within, if I were to put them in a numerical order, it'd be somewhere within the top 10. And this is a movie that, dating all the way back to my younger days, I think in grade school maybe, or maybe early junior high days, when I first discovered this movie, and I fell in love with this movie. And this is a movie that my parents paid the rental price for a VHS copy to give to me at Christmas. So you're talking like, $50 to $100 for one tape. And I still have that original VHS. I should have grabbed that as well. But it was also a movie that made me fall in love with bad movies. Even though I didn't honestly recognize it at the time as being a bad movie. And that is, it's the horror spoof from 1978, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, directed by John D. Bello. I've always loved this movie. As I've gotten older, there's some things in the movie that I'm like, man, it'd be nice if there was more tomato action and less musical numbers. But regardless, those musical numbers are awesome. The theme song in this movie is brilliant. There's some great gags in this movie, and I've never understood how this movie has ended up on some of the worst movies of all times list, because it's intentionally made to be a bad movie, but it still has a lot of heart in it, and it's still, I don't know how to put it, but it's a bad movie that it's not overly forced, the badness. And there's so many great moments in this movie where the great tomato action in it, where they attack a girl, or they attack a group of girls in the water, and you got the Jaws theme playing. Of course, the classic joke of, you got the newscaster voiceover saying, even the mere mention of the word strikes a panic, and it's a guy in the library, and he says, tomato, and everybody runs screaming. And I could go on and on and on and on, but I've always really, really, really loved this movie. This is the special collector's edition, which, honestly, I'm a little upset about the movie version in this, because this was during the time when this came out. Actually, no, I think it was during the time it came out on this version came out on VHS during the time when Lucas went back and added stuff to the original Star Wars trilogy, and so DeBello did that as well. And those shots stand out like a sore thumb, because they were obviously newly shot scenes that don't fit in this. Luckily, they're few and far between, so it doesn't happen a lot in this, and he didn't tinker with a whole lot, but, like, it's just a bummer that it had. But what's great about this set, it also has, like, the original 8mm Attack of the Killer Tomatoes movie that the filmmakers made before getting the funding to make this version. So, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, one of my all-time favorites. Another favorite of mine, and this is another film from the 70s, 1972, the year I was born. Yikes. Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. Directed by, is it written and directed by? I got IMDb handy right here to help me through this. Directed by Bob Clark, written by Alan Ornsby, starring Alan Ornsby's disco polyester outfit. And I guess Alan Ornsby is wearing the outfit at the time. But this movie is awesome. I remember I first learned of this movie thanks to Gore Zone magazine and Chaz Bollin's Peace of Mind article, which was like a Bible to me, and it was like a checklist for me of movies that I wanted to seek out. It was because of him that I got into Italian films, and it's also because of him because he did an article on the 70s Bob Clark films, and the Bob Clark-Alan Ornsby team-up. And so that article just blew me away, and I needed to see these movies. And I think most of these movies are in this pile. Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things being the first one. Alan Ornsby wrote it, stars in it, and did the makeup effects in it. And I love the looks of the zombies in this. I mean, it's obviously low-budget zombie work, but it's effective. It works really well. And granted, this movie takes forever before it gets to the zombies, but I'm so invested with the characters and all the bad jokes and pop culture references by the actors in the movie, and the performances, the over-top performances of some of the characters in this movie, that I'm obsessed with watching them. And then when the zombies show up, it's like, oh yeah, that's right, this is supposed to be a zombie movie. So, because the zombie stuff it happens, it's awesome, and it's over. You know, it goes by, the zombie stuff goes by really quick. But I think this movie has a lot of great atmosphere, and that's one of the things I love about extremely low budget movies. That I think, like, a lot of times really low budget movies, what they're lacking actually helps their film, because, you know, some of the scenes are just way too dark, where, like, things just disappear into blackness in the background because they're not lighting the woods enough and stuff, and it looks really cool. Though there's like a scene where the zombies are attacking, and girl's standing by the door, and the zombie comes up and pulls the zombie just straight into pure blackness, and all you hear is her screaming, and it's a cool kick-ass shot. But I think 75% of it is like they just didn't have the lights to light up the exterior, so they just drug her into darkness, and the stuff like that. I love all the, like, the Foley work in this movie, and the score, and it's just awesome. The movies that Bob Clark made in this era, especially the ones where he teamed up with Alan Ornsby, are some of my all-time favorite films, and like I said, you'll see them as we go on. Now, another movie, I talk about a lot on the podcast, and that is from 1986, Neon Maniacs! Yeah! Neon Maniacs, I think, has now officially, over time, I'm even wearing my Neon Maniacs t-shirt, officially over time has become maybe within my top 10 favorites as well. Like, for the longest time, this movie I first discovered on USA Up All Night, hosted by Gilbert Gottfried and Rhonda Shear. I think Gilbert Gottfried was Saturday nights, Rhonda Shear was Friday nights. They play Neon Maniacs quite a bit. It was also on, like, Saturday Nightmares. I think they even screened it once on Commander USA's Groovy Movies. This movie was all over the USA Network. They recycled it a lot. And, but when I watched it on USA Up All Night, we're talking really late at night, and my parents are asleep, so there's this pure isolation watching this movie, and there's such an isolation vibe in this movie. Again, budgetary. I don't think they had the money for extras in a lot of scenes, because there's scenes where like the couple's on the subway and there's nobody else in the subway, or they're walking down a street and there's nobody else around. And I just think it's probably because they just couldn't afford the extras. But I think it creates such a surreal, dark universe, like an alternate universe where these teenagers are literally all alone. Like, there's no parents in this movie. They're just so alone and trapped in this world where they're just being stalked by these neon maniacs. And for the longest time, I would almost say this was like a guilty pleasure movie, because I was almost, for decades there, almost ashamed to admit that I like this movie, because it's low budget, it's cheap, I mean, I think the creatures look amazing, but where do they come from? Who are they? What's going on? Why is their weakness water, but they live under the Brooklyn Bridge? There's a lot of stuff in this movie that doesn't make any sense. And it just has a super abrupt ending. It's got some of the cheesiest 80s music, rock music of all time. But I love all of that. And I think until like maybe 10, 15 years ago that where I finally just said, I'm going to stand up and scream proud, I love Neon Maniacs. And I've always tried to learn as much as I could about this movie. There's just not a ton of information out there. So Neon Maniacs, another favorite. Now I'm going to take a huge turn on you, and I told you, like, not every movie on this list is going to be horror movies. And those of you who know me also know that I am a huge fan of comedy. But, you know, there's movies that are here that don't fall into either category. And that's the next one. And it's a pretty dark and serious film. And it's even a documentary. And it's Paradise Lost. The child murders at Robin Hood Hills. The first one in particular, I love the whole trilogy. The third one kind of feels like they recycled a little bit too much footage of 1 and 2, where it's like this Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 of the trilogy. Just kidding. But I've watched the first one over and over and over again. And this movie and what happened to these guys in this movie really struck a chord with me, and really wanted me to get involved, because it wasn't right, and it's to me it's terrifying. The injustice, the lynch mob the lynch mob mentality that went on with the 3 kids in this movie, and as horror fans, you know, I really feel that we can relate to what goes on in this film. You know, because we wear the black T-shirts, we love horror movies that are, you know, with heads exploding and people getting ripped apart. You know, a lot of us love heavy metal music, and we are these kids in this movie. And I know I've had my share of looked down upon, or people walking the other way when they see me coming. You know, I've had a lot of those instances in my life, and especially in my teenage years, where, you know, people just didn't get me, and, you know, thought maybe something was wrong with me. And there is, but that's a whole other topic. So I found this movie, this whole series, really relatable. But this one in particular is one that I've watched a lot. Moving on, jumping back into horror, another film that is really low budget, and I feel like the budget restraints help the film, at least for me. It doesn't really, I don't think, enhances anything, but the bad acting and the terrible audio and the awful lighting, I find endearing. And we're jumping into the 80s here, 1983, with one of the greatest monster designs of all time. I don't care what anybody says, it's true. And we're talking about The Deadly Spawn. And this movie, it's gore-tastic. It's got a lot of great gore in it. It feels like that every nickel of the budget went into the effects. And it really shows, because look at these guys. This is an artist rendering right here. But this is what these mothers look like. They're freaking awesome. just a big penis with a huge mouth and a ton of teeth. They're glorious, and they're vicious and brutal, and I've just always really loved this movie, dating all the way back to when I first rented it on VHS under the title Return of the Aliens Deadly Spawn, which I should have grabbed. I've talked about my big box copy on the podcast over and over again, and I didn't grab it for this. I think when I do the next video in this series, I'll come back to it and show you the big box. This is a thing. Last one I want to talk about on this video, and this movie is from 1993, written and directed by Tom Stern and Alex Winter from Bill and Ted fame. It's one of my all-time favorite comedies. It is what I aspire to write when I'm writing my own films, for comedy is concerned. I mean, this is like Mad Magazine exploded and mutated into a film, and that is Freaked. I actually just rewatched it with the director's commentary earlier today, preparing for this madness, and it's just so over the top. If you've never seen Freaked, I highly recommend checking it out. It's got an amazing, crazy cast. Brooke Shields is in it. Mr. T plays the bearded lady. Alex Winter, of course, is in it, and he plays the lead, Ricky Coogan. It's also got William Sadler in it, which is always awesome. But hands down, the greatest performance by this man ever in history. I don't care what anybody says. Forget the vacation movies, but Randy Quaid as Eliza C. Scuggs in this movie is amazing. It's got Bobcat Goldthwait in it as Saki the Sockhead. It's just jam-packed full of really cool actors in it. But beyond that, it's effects galore. There's all these mutant freaks in this movie. There's there's Cowboy, who's a half man, half cow. There's the Dog Boy, which is played by a uncredited Keanu Reeves. How awesome is that? In full Dog Boy makeup. There's the human worm, the bearded lady I mentioned, and the effects are awesome. Like every major effects crew contributed to this movie. Screaming Mad George, you name it, they all contributed to the Giotto brothers. Ton of them. But beyond that, this movie is hilarious. I always still find myself laughing hysterically. It's got that almost kind of airplane style humor, but on a whole different epic level. So there's no other movie that's like this, and it's a shame, because I wish these guys would make more movies like this. I mean, Alex Winter has gone on to make some amazing documentaries. Like he made that Napster documentary a few years ago, and I'm really excited because he's working on this massive Frank Zappa documentary that I can't wait for, because I'm also a big Frank Zappa fan. So Frank Zappa with Alex Winter, amazing. But and I've seen some of their New York Film School videos, like Squeal of Death, which is on this DVD. And that same style of humor is there. So I wish they would do. And then they had that MTV show, The Idiot Box, which is also that same style of humor. And so I just wish they would have made more feature films. But I mean, this movie is awesome, and it got shelved. It really set them back, and they just moved on. So understandable, but man, their sense of humor is right in key with mine, and it's just amazing. But that's enough of that. I want to wrap up this video for now, because I feel like it's gone on really long. And when we come back next time, we'll go through another batch of films that are part of my 100 favorite films. So we'll see you again real soon.